Assalamu alaikum, guys, and welcome to another episode of Over the Line. Today, we are here to talk about the recent loss that we all suffered, in the footballing world as well as our own world. We're going to be talking about the legend Diego Maradona. We are joined by two people who, just like the rest of us, are avid followers of not only the game but know how important Maradona was for football as well as the world itself. Shahrukh Bhai and Usman Bhai, glad to have you guys here with us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today,
Thank you.
celebrating the life of just a most wonderful footballer that I've ever seen.
For sure, for sure. With Maradona, there have been different parts of his life that we got to see as we, from his earlier days in Boca Junior to his big money move to Barca, from then to Napoli, and then even after the game, he was such an influential figure, for the game as well as the political aspect of it as well. And so, keeping that in mind, let's what does Diego Maradona mean to you guys?
So maybe I'll start. I think people often say this about Maradona, and it's incredibly important, is that when you talk about Maradona, you're sort of either talking about Maradona, the footballer, or Diego, the person, right? And the two are two very sort of distinct entities. But I think another thing people miss is that it's actually not two entities, but a third. And the third is Diego or Maradona, the legend, the myth. That the symbol that transcends football, that transcends politics. In many ways, Diego, and I don't think it's hyperbole to say this, is symbolically like a Che Guevara-esque figure. I mean, there's this wonderful sort of painting of Maradona with like a halo around him. It's a very famous image, and that for me sums up what Maradona has actually become, more than a player, more than an individual. And, Maradona had an incredibly had an incredibly complicated life. I mean, whatever else he did on the football field, in the real world, he had a lot of problems. There was obviously drug abuse, allegations of domestic violence, and, problems with money, affiliations with the mafia when he was in Naples. So, it was a very complicated, a very textured life. And yet everything, but ultimately all that eventually over time will be forgotten and we'll be left with Maradona, the myth. And I think almost all of that owes itself to not only what he did on the football field, but just what he symbolized and what he became for so many people. And I think his time in Naples especially, people talk about Argentina, but Naples is where the myth was born. Naples is where sort of the myth germinated and, it really came alive. And I'm sure we'll talk about his time in Naples a bit later. But, I mean, for me, Maradona is his whole significance is his transcendency. Yes, he was an absolutely amazing, incredible player. For me, if I was to pick the three greatest players of all time, I'd always have Cruyff, Maradona, and Messi. They would be my three. I'm sure people would beg to differ. People would ask why Pele is not part of the equation. I have my own reasons, my own metrics for coming up with these three. But, as amazing a player as he was, the significance of Maradona will always be, again, in what he symbolized to so many people. Like even the World Cup win in Argentina, that match against England, it wasn't just a football match. It was happening in the backdrop of the Falklands War coming to an end. The fact, that Argentina was a semi-colony, I guess you can say, of the British. There was just so much at play there. And then the hand of God goal, and then that's the second goal, which we all know. It was so much more than football. Everything about him was just so much more than football or politics or who he was as a person. And like I said, he was an incredibly complicated and often difficult person. But what he symbolized to people, it went up above and beyond that.
Yeah, and that rings very true, especially about Maradona, because even we know all the things that that were happening off the pitch, with the drug abuse, with the illegitimate children as well. But the way that he still comes out unscathed and loved by the people in Argentina. It's not like it's just Argentina. People in Europe, people in Spain, people in Italy, the way he's loved, it shows that what he really stood for was much stronger than his complications, the kind of things that even as a player, I think we can all say his career wasn't smooth sailing by any means. If you'd like to comment on that, Shahrukh bhai.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it wasn't. But just to come back to what Usman was mentioning earlier on as well about his dark side, if you would want to call it that, and the demons that he had to challenge and confront. I think the fact of the matter is that what made him so lovable and so adored by the public was that he was able to confront them, right? That he was
Yeah,
able to accept that he had this dark side, that he had contradictions, that he was a flawed person. And that's what made him so appealing to the world, because it wasn't just the fact that he was a brilliant footballer, that he was this demigod, for people in Naples and across Argentina, but the fact that he was also human, right? He had this human side to him, which was similar to what everyone else is like. Right? Every human being is imperfect. We all have our contradictions. We all have our flaws, and that's what made him, so lovable. Is the fact
yeah,
and part of his greatness was in the fact that he was able to confront and accept those flaws, and yet, like Usman said, he was able to transcend them to produce magic on the field, and that's where he was the happiest, right? He
yeah.
always said that. I don't know if you guys have seen this wonderful documentary that Asif Kabadia made about him a couple of years ago. And towards the end of the documentary, Maradona, he's in his 50s, and I think he's coaching some team in the UAE at that time, and he just says that this is where I'm the happiest, on this green pitch, 100 by 70. This is where he feels he's most comfortable, and he's able to get rid of all his inner contradictions and his demons. But for me, I mean, the earliest memory of Maradona lies in the 1990 World Cup. I was actually too young to watch the 86 World Cup live, and Jesse, we all know, उस time पे पाकिस्तान में आपको सिर्फ इंटरनेशनल टूर्नामेंट्स देखने को मिलते थे. We didn't have access to club football at that time.
I wasn't even
And my
born.
father, my father, like most Pakistani football fans, was a huge Maradona fan, and he would make me sit down and watch the World Cup. And even at that time, even in 1990, he was what? He was about 30 years old. So you can say he was just about past his peak, but you could see that he could will the team forward just through his sheer determination. Right? And I remember reading about this as well, that he would take pain-killing injections for his ankle problems just to walk onto the field. And the way that he cried at the end of that final when they lost to West Germany, I mean, that just left a very lasting impression on me. And then I went back and I watched this 86 documentary on the World Cup called Hero. And I think I've watched that documentary about it more than a dozen times. And I mean, you had some amazing players on the world stage at that time, from Michel Platini to Socrates and Zico and Francescoli and Hugo Sanchez, and you name them. There was a stellar cast of footballers, but the entire world's eyes were just fixated on Diego and what he achieved on that stage. It was just amazing. I don't think anyone has had that kind of an impact on a world tournament
I think
before or
coming
since
back,
that.
yeah, exactly the point that you're making about the way he stood up against he's the way he moved past difficulties was what made him so special and loved. For example, like if you remember from what when he moved to Barcelona, the 2 years he spent there, he barely played. 30 games maybe, right? And then
Yeah.
when he moved to Napoli in 84, people said that the most expensive player in the world has moved to the poorest team in Italy.
Yeah.
And from then onwards, we know what happened in Napoli, right?
Yeah.
The
I think
yeah
another
the,
point that was sort of missing here is the fact that, you see, back then you didn't have social media, you didn't have this professional outfit around you to sort of guide your public image and sort of curate your public image, in fact. And so Maradona's entire life was played out in public. right? From
Yeah,
his,
that's
like you
that's
mentioned,
very true.
his illegitimate children, to his drug problems, to his association with the Neapolitan mafia. Uh, Everything was played out in the public eye, right? That there was no like curation of his public image. And that's also something that obviously must have affected him, right? I mean, he didn't have that stellar support cast around him of top international players either, right? Because there was a limit on the number of foreigners that a team could incorporate. So everything that he had to deal with, he had to deal with on his own, because his hangers on or his entourage was actually, as we later found out, they were all just there for the good time, and they actually
Yeah.
led him astray. So, I mean, he had his
Even
issues, obviously, but he
yeah,
didn't have that support system around him to guide him past that. I mean,
absolutely.
we used to read about this very interesting anecdote regarding Caesar. For instance, that Caesar used to have these 2 or 3 people behind him walking all the time who would keep reminding him that you're just mortal, you're just human. No one had. No one behind Maradona used to tell him that, right? Everyone used
Yeah.
to tell him that you're like a god. So to
Mm.
achieve success at that young age, for someone who had come from the shanty outskirts of Buenos Aires, from a very tough and rough neighborhood, one of the most dangerous in Argentina, and to achieve that sort of global success and recognition, I mean, obviously, who wouldn't fall for the dark elements?
Yeah. Even even during his time in Napoli, there's very popular belief that he used to, post match, he used to head out and then party to till Wednesday, doing all the stuff that we've heard about him, and then he'd just show up for training on Thursday. That kind of shows how less, he was supported, and how he should have carried his career the way the way nowadays players do, how controlled they are in terms of diet,
Yeah.
even them going out, the amount of whatever they consume is so controlled by clubs nowadays. So yeah, I totally
Absolutely.
agree with
I
that.
think
Yeah,
if Maradona had existed today, it would still have been the same Maradona. Those constraints, and that's what makes Maradona just such a one of a kind.
Yeah.
yeah,
He was his own man. Rightly or wrongly, like I said, we mentioned there was an incredibly, very dark and very sinister dark side, but he was his. There was not, like, for example, Pele, right? One of the reasons for me, like, the default position a lot of times when you ask people who the best player in the world is just to say Pele. But for football fans, I think for proper football fans, it's just there's something about Maradona. Pele's like the sanitized, FIFA ideal of what the best player in the world should be. Whereas with Maradona, it's just, he was a maverick. And I think that would have been true. Like even today, you have players like Mario Balotelli and stuff, right? They have, all the right management and stuff. And yet, you know,
for sure.
who they are sort of is
That's
stronger.
crazy element.
All the sort of sanitization of modern day football, right? And I just feel that would have been true for Diego in all ages.
Yeah,
Like for me, my first memory, Italia 90 was very much the tournament that got me into football. And I think for a lot of our generation, and in fact, I think, Italia 90 actually wasn't that great a tournament when you think about it. There was a lot of draws. There was a lot of goalless draws. A lot of the knockout matches were just,
penalties. Yeah.
these were just the one goal deciding them. And I remember the first football match I ever watched was Brazil-Argentina in the second round of Italia 90. And I was just a kid. I was kind of watching it, kind of not watching it. And then right at the end, right at the death, Maradona does that mazy run and then sets up, Caniggia.
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah.
And so, you Shahrukh talked about, the tears of Maradona in the final, but Italia 90 was the tournament of tears. There was the Gaza tears, there was the Maradona tears in the final, but there was another set of tears which people forget about, which had a huge impact on me. And that was when Argentina scored, the camera panned to the crowd, and there was this old Brazilian man just like sobbing at the fact that his team had lost. And I was like, I'll never forget that goal. There's two goals which had a huge impact on me in that tournament. One was the David Platt goal, which was scored in the last minute against Belgium. And as an England fan at the time, that was a huge moment for me. And Maradona was somebody I was supposed to hate, and I kind of did. I disliked Argentina a lot. I disliked West Germany. They were West Germany at the time. And, I was a kid. I couldn't analyze anything. I wasn't able to tell formations or, what was going on, or whether a team was playing actually well or playing badly, or whether they were playing on the counter or whatever. But with Maradona, right, there was just an aura. And that you could pick that up even as a kid. That this guy, he knew he was the best. Whether he was having a good game or a bad game. I don't know, when people, when you play in sports sometimes, right? I play squash a lot. Sometimes even when you're losing, you kind of know you've got the game in the bag. You might lose the first 4 or 5 points, but you know which way the game's going, and you kind of know that if I just push myself a little more, this game is mine. And I feel that with Maradona, every time he got on the pitch, he was just like, I've got this. And so powerful.
Yeah, that kind of rings true as well, because records show that he's still, even till today, the most fouled player in a single World Cup. He was fouled 53 times. So he was in his own world when he played the game, He didn't care where, he knew what he was doing. 53 times in one World Cup he was fouled, and he still holds a record for it. So it kind of shows what you're trying to say, with him being his own player, his own, he's a very individualistic person, at least on the pitch, right? And off it as well. So
yeah, but at the same time, he was also someone who carried the team with him. He was very proud of doing that, and keeping everyone together, and enjoyed the fact that he was the one that the team would look up to and seek out to score that winning goal or to produce that moment of magic. Jorge Valdano, who was his teammate in the 86 World Cup winning team, he used to say that that we would sleep with ease at night before a game, because we knew that we had Diego on our side. Right? We knew that he would be the one to make the difference, and that even if we lost, that he would be the one getting the blame. Right? So we had no pressure on us, because he would take the entire pressure on himself, and he relished that. He loved being the one in the spotlight and to the one to carry the team forward. And that's what all-time greats do, right? They revel in that environment, they revel in the spotlight, and Diego was certainly someone who did not back down from the challenge.
Yes, Usman.
There was a match the other day. It was AC Milan were playing, right? And I'm sure most people have been following Zlatan's great revival at Milan, right? And there was a point where one of his teammates, right, missed a goal, or missed a pass. I can't remember exactly, but Zlatan didn't scold them, right? He wasn't like a Ronaldo going after me, why didn't you pass to me or whatever, right? Zlatan was that encouraging, come on guys, we've still got this. And Zlatan's another sort of modern day maverick, and Maradona had that. Obviously, we're not on the pitch. We can't tell what's going on. We're not at training. But all of his teammates, they were like, Maradona never had that. Even though he was so much superior to sort of all the players around him, he was never judgmental. There was a real sort of team ethic going on with that Argentina team. And just the fact that they had the best player in the world, and not only the best player in the world, but one of the most prominent personalities in the world, somebody who could shield them. I mean, Maradona wasn't just the captain on the field. He was a shield for that whole team.
For sure.
Everything was absorbed by him. Everything came at him, and everything was absorbed. When we talk about the hand of God goal, nobody talks about the fact that the other Argentinian players knew that had happened, and yet they went and ran to celebrate with Maradona, right? They helped up. It's just, Maradona was the cheat. Maradona did this. So he kind of absorbed everything inside of his own sort of personality.
There's a very popular saying about that goal as well. It kind of just what you just said reminded me that when Maradona scored that goal and the players came rushing to, he was like circle around me so that the referee just starts off with the kicks it off immediately. We just
Yeah.
to distract him. I remember that. I
Yeah.
read that somewhere. So
Yeah,
yeah,
because
he was still leading them at the same time as well, even after the goal. That's very interesting. Yeah, even like. With Maradona, even we can, if you look at the time he spent in Napoli, right? When he went to 84 in '84, he had around about 100 goals for the club in less than 200 games from midfield, and it's widely. That's why he's so loved by the people in Naples because they've only won, I think, one European Cup and two leagues, and I think all of them were achieved when Maradona was at the club, which kind of shows how important.
I think Naples really is the Maradona story.
For sure.
And I'm so glad he didn't succeed at Barcelona. Like, I'm so glad he succeeded at one of the big clubs because Naples, that was the club, that he should have succeeded at. This grimy city known more for organized crime and for, this really visceral place, which, it has a perpetual chip on its shoulder, is always, kind of slightly angry at the big cities in the north, feels that it doesn't get its due. I mean, that was just such a perfect, coming together of, the cosmos and destiny and everything, bringing Maradona to Napoli. Before Maradona came, I was reading this amazing statistic. I don't know how true it is, to be honest, but that Napoli, before Maradona's arrival, had never even sat at the top of Serie A. I think they had two domestic. One was the Coppa and one was another minor Italian cup. And I mean, if we contextualize it today, Maradona, in the Asif Kapadia documentary, they say that it's like going to Nottingham Forest, but it's not like going to Nottingham Forest because Nottingham Forest still had trophies. They were two-time European champions.
Yeah.
They were the league champions. For Maradona to go to Napoli was like going to a West Ham or a Sunderland. These kind of semi-big, which kind of have a storied history, but don't really have any kind of success whatsoever. And I think one thing that's often always missed about Maradona's story in Italy is that from around that period up until, I would say, the sale of Zidane to Real Madrid, for those sort of 12, 15 years, Serie A was not only the greatest league in the world at the time, it was the greatest league and greatest collection of players ever assembled. I mean, you're never going to top that. Nobody was going to Spain. Nobody was going to England. Nobody was going to France. Everyone was coming to Serie A. Like now, you have a more spread of players, right? Some of the good players really in Spain, especially in Italy, not so much anymore, but still you have a number of decent. I mean, you have Cristiano Ronaldo in Italy right now. But before everyone came to Italy, so not only was he playing for like a West Ham-sized club in Italy, right? He was up against Sacchi's
AC Milan.
Milan,
Yeah. One of the greatest teams of all time.
Yeah.
Exactly. Also like the German defender who won the World Cup. He was at
Lothar Matthäus.
Matthäus is Inter.
Platini's Juventus.
Laudrup, Laudrup, Platini, and Bonetti, and Juve, the historically big team.
Yeah. I think even Rummenigge was playing for Juventus at that time, right?
Baresi also for Milan at the time, I think.
Yeah, so
you had these teams, and people are like, "Oh, Maradona only won 2 titles at Naples." Yeah, but he did it amongst even Sacchi's AC Milan. They only won 1 league title. They're known more for their European cups. Maradona did it, beating the very best of the best. And Naples, in the years Maradona was there, I'm excluding his last season because that was all a drug ban. But in the years Maradona was at Naples, Napoli were the only team to win Serie A twice. And then you also have UEFA Cup victory. And, you can't compare what the UEFA Cup was to what the Europa League is at the moment. The UEFA Cup was a big deal. I mean, I guess you could argue that he never got the old European Cup or what is today the Champions League. But at the same time, for me, at that time, Serie A was a greater achievement. I mean,
For
the
sure.
old European Cup format, you had, teams from like Sweden and like just, you only had the champions and you had them from,
That's right.
no disrespect to Swedish teams, but, the best players and the best teams were all in Italy. And
For sure.
Maradona won 2 Serie A's, and I think he won it at the time of that league's peak. And he won it with the most average out of the competing teams. Napoli were the most average. If you were to line them all up, Juve, Inter, Roma, and Milan, take out Maradona, and that Napoli team, it wasn't great. It was an okay team, but it was nothing more than a mid-table team. And that just really, and the fact that it was Napoli, the fact that he actually went and he got involved with the mafia, it's just so Maradona. Everything about Naples just sums up Maradona the man, Maradona the player, and Maradona the myth.
Yeah.
I don't think any player has been more synonymous with another football club. And you've had lots of players who've played all their careers with one club. Di Stefano at Milan, you've got Gerrard, say, at Liverpool. There's lots of players who are so associated with one club, Cruyff with Ajax, but I don't think anyone is like Maradona. His association with Naples, it lasted 5 years, but what a 5 years. And it really left an indelible mark on Naples, on Italy, on the club, just on the whole history of football.
I think, just to continue on that point, I'll just make one final point on this, his time in Napoli. The 1990 World Cup, this is Argentina versus Italy in the semi-final. This is the semi-final of the World Cup. The host team is playing Argentina. And the ultras from Napoli, they were supporting Argentina. I mean, just imagine the sort of impact that he left on that city, that they were supporting a team that was playing against their home nation. So, there's nothing more.
That's unbelievable. That's unbelievable.
And Maradona, before the match, Maradona actually said there's no way that Naples supporters are not going to support me.
Exactly.
Wow.
But that was also what brought his time to Italy to an end, because once the match was over, like, oh no.
What has he done?
Like, a defeat over. And, the country, they blamed Maradona. They blamed the Napoli supporters. And then that was a stigma that remained with the club for a long, long time.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I had no idea that was part of the entire situation as well. Very, very cool. I think with that, we can conclude our tribute episode for Diego Maradona. I think we've overall covered quite well the man's achievement, what he did for the game, what he did for the people, what he did for Argentina, the way he helped, the way he stood for the poor, how well he carried that nation towards, so many different elements in it, right? And I would just like to thank Shahrukh Bhai again and Usman Bhai again for joining us today. And please go ahead.
The two players who've had the greatest impact on football ever are Cruyff and Maradona. Cruyff, I mean, the guy invented a move that's named after him now, but Cruyff, he's not only associated with total football and all of that, but Cruyff, the thinker as well. In fact, for me, in terms of pure football, nobody's had more of an impact on the game than Cruyff has ever, in terms of, shaping tactics, in terms of and in terms of Cruyff, the player as well. But nobody's transcended the game in the way Maradona has.
For sure.
Like, when you speak to people, you say name a footballer, 80% of people, they'll say Maradona. And, they might never have watched him play. They might really not know about, his side or anything else. But, Maradona is one of the few people who ever spoke up, a few public figures who spoke up for the Palestinian people. I mean, it's one thing being a leftist, because a lot of public figures have still taken up that cause. But to actually speak up, on the Palestinian cause, it's actually a huge thing for a public figure to do, especially in the time that he was doing it. It's a bit more acceptable now than it was in the 80s and the 90s. And I just feel that impact, especially, Shahrukh was mentioning that today you have Entourage and you have a lot of, people hiding your public image. Just the way football is going, the corporatization of football, I just don't see us having another Maradona, and I don't see the game ever having, a player with those skills. Like the best players in the world today, let's be honest, they either don't talk a lot or the stuff they say is very banal, it's very boring. I mean, I mentioned Balotelli, but he's not one of the, he's not going to go down as one of the legends.
Yeah, for sure.
And for me at least, I mean, that just sums up the man. That it's just impossible in any way, shape, or form to see another Maradona ever coming.
Very true. I think we all believe that, and that's what makes his loss so much more for us, to feel as well. I would like to thank you guys again for joining us, so we could pay tribute to the great that Maradona was. Thank you so much, Usman Bhai, for showing how passionate you were about him and for letting us, learn so much about the guy as well. Thank you, as always, Shahrukh Bhai, for letting us know how you felt about Maradona and what important he held for you. And we learned a lot today from you as well. Thank you so much for coming, guys. It was an absolute pleasure. And with that, we would like to conclude this show and have a good day.